So what I intend to do now is take you through how to answer each of the questions for the GCSE History AQA Paper 1, and the section I'm going to talk about is conflict and tension in Asia. If you would like more detailed explanation as to how to answer the questions, you will see there will be a link to a playlist below. You can click on that and I will go through each question in more detail, but this is a one-stop shop where I go through everything, albeit not in a great deal of detail. So really important, read each question carefully, underline the key words. Whilst effectively the questions are always asking for the same skills, the focus of each question will be different, so really look at that focus. Timing is really important. In paper 1 you've got 4 questions in this part and you've got 6 questions in the other part. So, a lot of questions, you really have to stick to the time. Make sure you annotate, scribble on those sources in particular. They're yours to do that with, and a bit of planning always is worth it in terms of time. Don't forget spelling and grammar for Q4, incredibly important. That's why you have to reread your work. Check capital letters. If you want to put a paragraph in and you haven't, 2 little lines, and the examiner will understand that. Obviously do your best with spelling, but certainly those punctuation things you should be really on top of, and reading your work will help. Answer everything. I say this every time. There is no point leaving something blank. You won't lose marks for getting it wrong. You might not gain any, but there's no point leaving something blank. Take an educated guess if you are not sure, but do not leave anything blank. Okay, let's look at question number 1. So the first question you'll get in the War in Asia paper will be a 4-marker. Always about 5 minutes. You can have a little bit longer, but you want to be aiming for around that amount. It will always be a picture, a primary source, from the time of the Korean or the Vietnam War in the case of the unit we're doing. And it will say, study the source. Source A supports something or source A rejects something. How do you know? Now, relatively straightforward system for this. Read the question carefully, underline that last bit. It says supports, so that's the one thing, and then it says supports the Viet Cong. So you've got to be looking for things within that source that in this case support the Viet Cong. You must reference the source. I mean, in this case you can see Viet Cong soldiers forcing Americans to surrender. You can see them liberating villages. Try to reference the source specifically, and then what you need to do is use some contextual knowledge to explain what you are seeing. So for example, you can see that the Viet Cong here are not wearing uniforms, and you can explain that that was part of their guerrilla tactics. You can reference the fact that they're kind of coming out of the jungle and surprising the Americans. Again, you can talk about the guerrilla tactics they used to do that. So show that you understand the context here. Reference the source, explain using your knowledge of what's going on. You can also refer to the provenance. So this is a Chinese poster, and you should be able to, you could use some knowledge to explain the fact that, the Chinese supported the Viet Cong by supplying them with weapons. So you can use your contextual knowledge for the content or the provenance or both, but remember this is only a 4-marker. It would be tempting to write lots and lots and lots, but a couple of things, a couple of bits of knowledge, that's fine. Okay, don't write too much, but make sure you're precise in your knowledge. So that's Q1. So I've said 4 sentences. 4 good sentences could get you all the marks, as long as they're well written and they're well evidenced. Right. Okay, question 2. This is 12 marks, so this is going to take you longer. This is going to be at least 15 minutes. You could probably have a little bit more. Now the skills are pretty similar to what you've just been doing. Once again, you will have primary sources. You'll have sources from the time of the Korean or the Vietnam War, and you'll ask how useful they are. Now it says, again, underline the words, so you've got to be looking for something within the sources. In this case, it's how useful are they for someone or a historian studying America and the Korean War. So you've got to look at these and think, what is this telling me about America and the Korean War? Annotate this source, write all over it, just like the other one. And I have a system for this, which my students will know, which is scope. And the way, hopefully that stays in your mind, because I want you to think of it like a scope on a gun, focusing in on how to answer the question. So my scope is, the system is this. What's it saying? What is each source saying about the US and the Korean War? I would do each one in turn, by the way. I'd say this one says this. Then content or contextual knowledge. You've got to use some knowledge to explain what it says. Now you can agree with it or possibly disagree with it, but you've got to say, and I'm going to use my knowledge to explain this. Thirdly and fourthly, I'll put those together, the O and the P are the origin and purpose. So then you've got to think about the provenance. This is the stuff above the content. This is who said it, when they said it, and purpose, why they said it. And you've got to think, well, why does this make it interesting to an historian? Why would, in this case, the fact that it was a secret report, so therefore more likely to be telling the truth, came from one of the first American representatives working in Communist China, so an expert. Therefore, he's writing, he's there, he knows about this, so he's writing this to inform. It's that kind of thing which makes it useful for an historian. In the end, what you want to do is evaluate. Now, I would say that basically to evaluate, you're comparing the two and you're saying how they are both useful in different ways, but kind of when put together, they give a really interesting reflection. And again, if you look at this source, it's both two sources concerned about similar things being tied down in Korea and the kind of the number of casualties piling up, but they come from different sources, different angles, but to put together, they're really useful to historians. So follow that method. What they're saying about what it's asking, how can you use some contextual knowledge to explain it? Can you refer to the origin and purpose, who made it, when and why makes that useful? And then at the end, the really best answers, if you can, say, well, they're both useful, but they're useful in different ways, and then put together. And I would focus more on why they are useful rather than why they're not. No source can tell you everything. Focus principally. You can say that they might not be right, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not useful. So follow that method if you can. Now, next one is a 8 marker. So that's about 10 minutes. And for this one, it's always write an account of something. So what is that asking you? It's asking you, it will ask you about an event. In this case, it's the Gulf of Tonkin. It could be that it asks you about the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, or it could be something to do with the Tet Offensive, or any other, or the last 2 years of the Korean War, or something. And what you need to do is you need to describe that period of time. But then it always asks you how it escalated, it got bigger. So during the course of this, how did something get worse or change? And so you've got to describe it, but you've got to explain how it led to something else. How it led to something. So in this case, it's how did the Gulf of Tonkin incident escalate or make the Vietnam conflict work? So describe it at least. Just even if you can't remember how it made it worse, just say what you can about it. But then ideally what you're doing is you're explaining how over time things got more problematic, or a problem got escalated, or whatever it might be. So you're looking for the chronology of the event, what happened, but you're also looking to show how at each stage things then got more tense or whatever it is and led to something else. So it's about describing and it's about explaining change, okay? You want to try and write about 3-4 events if you can within it, and showing how it led from one thing to another. But if you can't do that many, write down as much as you can and just describe what you think happened at least. But try if you can to describe it, explain at each stage why something got worse as a result of the thing that just happened. Okay? Now the last question is your big essay question, and if you look at it, this could be one you start with. I do often see people not leaving enough time for it. This is a 20-minute, this is a proper essay you should be having a go at writing if you ideally can. It's always got a statement in the title. It'll say the main reason for something was, or the main consequence of something. So it's usually causes or consequences of something. In this case, it's the main reason why the conflict in Vietnam ended was because of the anti-war movement. You must talk about the point in the statement. So in this case, you'd have to write a paragraph as much as you can on the anti-war movement. And remember, point, evidence, explain. Why did this lead to the end of the war? So say what you can about it. Why did it lead to the end of the war? Now, ideally, you should try to write about at least one other factor, and maybe even two would be great. In paragraphs, remember this is SPAG. So in this case, it's all about how the conflict in Vietnam came to an end. Well, you could talk about that, or for example, you could talk about the failure of the American military in Vietnam to achieve their objectives. That could be one thing you talked about, or you could talk about the strengths of the communists and why they were able to undermine the American effort. So that could be another thing. So 2 or 3 areas to talk about, as much detail as you can, link them back to the question. Now, the very, very top essays will have an introduction in which you say the things you're going to talk about, and maybe you give your opinion, and then a conclusion at the end, a judgment in which you say which was the most important and why, trying to link those things you've talked about. But the crucial thing is to write about those factors. That's where most of the marks come. Okay, thanks very much.